Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to impartially unpack some absolutely brilliant, enduring metaphors found in ancient texts. Specifically, we're looking at the book of Amos and the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to dive into exactly how ancient literature described massive paradigm shifts. We so often think of innovation and systemic change as strictly modern concepts, right? But these ancient writers use deeply relatable everyday imagery to explain exactly what happens when an entirely new reality just suddenly bursts onto the scene. So let's kick things off with an incredibly famous idiom straight from our source material. People do not put new wine into old wineskins. You've almost certainly heard this phrase, or maybe some variation of it, tossed around in business, tech, or personal development. It's a massive hook into a timeless narrative about innovation. But to really truly get why this metaphor hits so hard, we need to understand the historical context of restoration and renewal that actually sets the stage for it. Section 1. Visions of Restoration. Diving into the text from the book of Amos, it kicks off with this really striking visual of structural ruin. The Lord states a super clear intention. On that day, I will raise up the fallen hut of David and rebuild it as in the days of old. Just think about what that means for a second. The hut of David represents a once great kingdom, a massive structure that has completely fallen into disrepair. It's not just slightly damaged with a leaky roof, it is a fallen hut. The promise here isn't about slapping a quick patch on a few holes. No, it's about a fundamental, ground-up resurrection of something that was completely lost. Section 2. Rebuilding the Fallen Hut. The text actually lays out literal, step-by-step instructions for how this ancient rebuilding process works. It's like a playbook. Step 1, you raise the ruined structure off the ground. Step 2, you secure your borders by walling up the breaches, those broken parts of the defenses. And then Step 3, from that position of renewed strength, you expand to conquer what is left of Edom and the other surrounding nations. It's a highly structured, hyper-strategic approach to reclaiming total stability out of absolute chaos. Section 3. Mountains Dripping with Wine. Now, the imagery here in Amos is just, wow, it's breathtaking. It promises this overwhelming new reality where the harvest is so massive and so continuous that the plowman actually catches up to the reaper and the vintager to the guy sowing the seed. Picture that. Before you've even finished harvesting the old crops, the plowman is basically stepping on your heels to plant the new ones. It's this beautifully chaotic image that completely defies the normal boundaries of time and seasons. The text literally says, "The juice of grapes shall drip down the mountains, and all the hills shall run with it." It is an absolute explosion of vitality. So what does this all mean? The crucial takeaway is that this hyperabundance brings ultimate stability. The text promises that the people are going to rebuild and actually live in their ruined cities. They'll plant vineyards and drink their own wine, they'll set out gardens and eat the fruits, and honestly, most importantly, they will be planted upon their own ground, never again to be plucked from the land. This is the ultimate ancient vision of a new paradigm, complete, unshakable security wrapped in unbelievable abundance. Section 4. The Question of Fasting. Well, historically, when this promised new vitality actually shows up, it inevitably creates some friction. In the Gospel of Matthew, the disciples of John approached Jesus with a very pragmatic, real-world question. Why do we and the Pharisees fast much, but your disciples do not fast? This is such a perfect pivot point from that ancient prophecy of abundance we just talked about, right into a direct, on-the-ground debate over tradition. See, the old system required rigorous fasting and mourning, but the disciples of Jesus are acting like they're in the middle of a massive, ongoing celebration. You literally have two paradigms colliding head-on. Jesus answers their question by explaining that their current reality is like a vibrant wedding feast. He asks, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away, and sure, then they'll fast. But he's essentially telling them, look, those promised days of abundance and joy, the days where the mountains are dripping with sweet wine, they've arrived. They are happening right now. You simply cannot apply the behaviors of a funeral to a massive celebration. It's a completely new paradigm. Section 5. New wine, fresh wineskins. To really get into the mechanics of adaptation, Jesus uses a super practical, everyday example. You cannot patch an old, fragile cloak with a tough piece of strong, unshrunken cloth. Why? Because the second that new patch gets wet and shrinks, its fullness just violently pulls away from the old, worn-out fabric, and guess what? It causes an even worse rupture. You can't just slap a totally new, dynamic element onto a tired, brittle system and honestly expect it to hold together. And that brings us right back full circle to our opening quote. Rigid old wineskins, which remember were made of animal leather, have already been stretched to their absolute physical limit. If you fill them with vibrant, unfermented new wine, those gases are going to expand. But the old leather, it has zero elasticity left. It will inevitably burst, leaving you with a pungent, sticky mess all over the floor where both the precious wine and the skin are completely destroyed. It's a total loss of the container and the content.
Section 6. Embracing the New Paradigm.
These ancient texts are giving us a crystal clear pattern. The old structures, whether it's a ruined hut, a worn-out cloak, or brittle old wineskins, they simply cannot hold the new reality. The new vitality, that continuous harvest, the strong, unshrunk cloth, the expanding new wine, it absolutely demands structural adaptation. The text concludes with the perfect solution. Rather, they pour new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved. True restoration isn't just about catching a temporary burst of new energy or abundance. It's about actively building entirely new systems and fresh frameworks that can actually handle and sustain it over the long haul.
So, based on these incredibly powerful ancient texts, consider this as we wrap up our explainer today. We are all going to experience paradigm shifts, whether that's a massive pivot in our careers, a change in our relationships, or our own personal growth. But if we desperately try to force those vibrant new realities into our old, rigid ways of thinking, things tend to rupture. So ask yourself, what are the old wineskins in your own life? What rigid systems or outdated habits do you need to completely replace so you can truly embrace the new wine?